Lieutenant Kale had always been a man of few words. On a distant, bustling space station, where humans and aliens worked side by side, he preferred staying in the background. A soldier at heart, he had seen the horrors of war and the quiet moments of peace. Yet there was one thing Kale had never quite gotten used to: alien humor. It was unpredictable, strange, and often felt like it went way over his head. It was during one of these strange encounters that Kale first met Zira. The Julara were a species of highly intelligent beings, known for their sharp minds and, more famously, their odd sense of humor. Zira, with her wide blue eyes and silver hair, had a reputation among the crew as being one of the most mischievous. She had a knack for turning everyday situations into pranks that made everyone laugh, even if it was at someone else's expense. Kyle, as usual, was seated at the back of the conference room during a meeting with representatives from various alien species. His arms crossed, his face calm, Kale tried to ignore the conversation that buzzed around him. The council meeting was mostly about diplomatic matters, nothing Kale was particularly interested in. His mind drifted, focusing instead on the hum of the room's technology, the sound of alien languages he couldn't understand, and the flickering holograms of star maps. And then, without warning, Zira made her move. The room fell into a brief silence, and Kale looked up just in time to see Zira grinning mischievously. With a swift motion, she leaped up onto his chair, her legs landing softly on either side of him. Kale blinked in confusion as she sat down, her weight momentarily pressing on his lap. It wasn't a violent gesture, just a sudden, playful moment that caught everyone off guard. The room erupted in laughter, but Kale froze. He wasn't angry or uncomfortable, just shocked. Zira's prank was like nothing he had experienced before. It wasn't threatening or mean-spirited, but it was bold. Her playful smile met his confused gaze, and for a second there was an odd sense of understanding between them. "Surprised, Lieutenant?" Zira teased, her voice light, almost melodic. "I promise, I'm not going to bite." Kale, caught off guard by the situation, couldn't help but laugh awkwardly. The laughter from the rest of the room only made it worse, and for a moment, Kale felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in this way. "I'm not sure I'd call this funny," Kale muttered, trying to regain his composure. His tone was light, but the effect of Zira sitting on him was unsettling. There was something about it that he couldn't quite explain, something in his chest that felt odd. But Zira wasn't done yet. She smiled, unfazed by Kyle's discomfort, and jumped off his lap in one graceful motion, landing with a playful twirl. "Just testing the waters," she said with a wink. "You looked like you needed a little break from all the seriousness." Kyle, still trying to process what had just happened, chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm glad you're having fun," he replied, though inside something was stirring. He didn't know why, but the brief moment of contact had triggered something deep within him. It wasn't physical pain, but a strange sensation that seemed to come from somewhere inside him, as if something had shifted. As Zira returned to her seat, the room's atmosphere returned to normal, but Kale couldn't shake the feeling. He felt different. A subtle tension in his chest seemed to grow, though he couldn't pinpoint why. He ran a hand over his face, trying to dismiss the feeling, but it lingered. Something had changed in the most unexpected of ways, and Kale couldn't understand what it was. The meeting continued, but Kale's attention wavered. He tried to focus on the discussions, on the responsibilities of being a soldier and the tasks ahead, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that moment with Zira. He wasn't sure if it was the prank or something else, but it was as if his body was reacting to it in ways he didn't understand. Later that evening, Kale found himself alone in his quarters, pacing back and forth. He tried to shake off the feeling, but it seemed to persist. He could still feel the warmth of Zira's brief touch on his lap, a sensation that seemed to be embedded in his skin, like a memory that wouldn't fade. It was as if it had awakened something he couldn't quite explain. His mind raced, and he stood still for a moment, trying to breathe through it, get a grip Kale muttered to himself, clenching his fists. There was no reason to be so unsettled. It was just a joke, nothing more. He had faced life-threatening situations, battled hostile aliens, and survived worse than this. But this was different. The next day, Kyle found himself walking through the hallways of the station, trying to distract himself with the usual tasks of a soldier. Yet every time his mind wandered, it returned to the moment with Zira. He noticed how she would smile at him whenever their paths crossed, but there was something more in her eyes now, curiosity. She had triggered something even if she didn't know it, and Kale couldn't help but feel it too. He wasn't sure what it meant, but one thing was certain. Something inside him had been awakened, and it was only a matter of time before he understood what it was. Kale tried to focus. After the meeting with Zira, he had hoped the strange feeling would fade, but it didn't. The moment when she had sat on him, teasing him in front of everyone, lingered in his mind. It wasn't just awkward, it was unsettling. There was something about the way his body reacted that he couldn't explain. He had dismissed it at first as just a joke, a harmless prank, but something inside him had been triggered. Kyle had experienced plenty of dangerous situations, but this was different. He hadn't felt anything like it before. The next day, as Kale went about his duties, he found himself distracted. Every small task seemed to take longer than it should. Every glance from Zira, every playful smile made his heart race. It was as if something inside him was waking up, something dormant that he hadn't known existed. Focus, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. But his mind wouldn't listen. His muscles felt tense, and a strange energy seemed to surge through him, making him feel more alive than ever before. He couldn't deny that he felt stronger, faster, even though there was no obvious reason for it. Every step he took, every breath he drew, felt different, more powerful. Zira had done something to him. Kyle wasn't sure what, but it was like something deep inside him had been stirred. It wasn't just his physical strength that was changing. His senses seemed sharper. The sounds of the station, the hum of machinery, the conversations around him. All of it was louder, clearer, more intense. He could hear the heartbeat of the people around him, feel their emotions as if they were his own. It was overwhelming. Later that afternoon, as Kyle tried to make sense of everything, Zira found him again. This time, her playful grin was gone. She seemed concerned, as if she could sense that something wasn't right. "Kyle," she said, her voice soft. "Are you all right? You've been acting strange." Kyle hesitated. He didn't want to admit that he had no idea what was happening. To him, how could he? He was just a soldier, a normal human. There was no way he could explain the strange surge of power that seemed to be building inside him. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." Zira didn't seem convinced. She studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Then, without warning, she stepped closer to him. It was a subtle shift, but Kale could feel it. The air between them changed. He wasn't sure what it was, but he could sense her energy now, like it was flowing from her to him, matching the strange pulse in his own body. "I've seen you before," Zira said quietly, her voice serious now. "You're not fine, Kyle. I've been around long enough to know when someone's hiding something. What's going on with you?" Kyle took a deep breath. He could feel the pressure building, the power inside him fighting for control. Every part of him wanted to shout, to tell Zira everything, but he couldn't. He didn't even know where to begin. "I don't know," Kyle admitted, his voice hoarse. "Something happened yesterday. When you sat on me. It's like something inside me changed. I feel different. Like I've awakened." Zira's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as she studied him more carefully. "Awakened?" she repeated, her voice tinged with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Kyle muttered, frustration creeping into his words. "But it's like my senses are sharper. Everything feels stronger, like I'm not just human anymore. Zira didn't say anything for a moment. She seemed to be thinking deeply, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then slowly she nodded. I think I might know what's happening, she said softly. But you're not going to like it. Kale looked at her, confusion and fear mixing in his chest. What do you mean? Zira's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. There are legends among my people, stories of an ancient power that runs through the veins of certain humans. It's said that these humans are born with dormant abilities that can only be unlocked under the right circumstances. A moment of intense contact, something unexpected, something that awakens the power inside. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to think. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Are you saying this power inside me was always there? Zira nodded slowly. Yes, but it takes something special to trigger it. And from what I'm seeing, Kale, you're becoming something more than just a soldier. You're a wake-me thing that hasn't been. See, the next few days felt like a blur for Kale. What started as a strange sensation was now a full-blown transformation. Every step he took, every moment he spent in the busy corridors of the space station, felt different. His body felt lighter, but at the same time stronger. His senses were sharper than ever before. He could hear the smallest sounds, even the distant hum of machinery deep within the station. He could feel the energy of people around him, the emotions they hid, their intentions almost as clear as their spoken words. Kale tried to ignore it. He wasn't sure what was happening to him. This power, this strange change, felt like something he could never have prepared for. It wasn't like anything he had experienced before, not even during his training as a soldier. And it definitely wasn't something he'd ever read about in any of the reports or mission briefings. He was no longer sure of who he was, and that terrified him. Despite his confusion, Kale couldn't deny that the transformation was real. He found himself walking with more confidence, his posture straighter, his movements smoother and faster. A simple task that used to take effort now felt effortless. He didn't even need to think before reacting. His body seemed to know exactly what to do. But the strangest part was how much more aware he was of Zira. Every time they crossed paths, every time their eyes met, he felt something deeper, something that wasn't there before. She had been playful with him in the past, teasing him, but now her presence felt different. It was like she was the one thing that anchored him, the one thing that kept his newfound strength from spiraling out of control. Zira, for her part, seemed to notice the change in him as well. At first she kept her distance, unsure of how to approach him. She had felt the strange energy between them, but she didn't know what it meant. She had always been the one in control of situations, always the one who made the jokes, the one who set the tone. But now, as she watched Kale, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a man struggling with something he didn't understand. It was on the third day after their conversation that Zira finally approached him again. This time she didn't tease him. She didn't make any jokes or try to make light of the situation. She simply stood there, watching him carefully as he worked at a station, looking more focused than she had ever seen him. Kyle, she said softly, her voice gentle but firm, we need to talk. I think you're starting to realize what's happening, and I think it's time we figure out what comes next. Kale turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. What do you mean, what comes next? He asked, his voice a mix of frustration and confusion. I don't know what's happening to me, but I can feel it. It's like my body's changing and I don't know how to stop it. Zira stepped closer, her expression serious. The power inside you. It's not something you can control easily, but it's not just about the power. It's about what you do with it. Kale clenched his fists, a surge of anger rising inside him. I didn't ask for this, he snapped. This isn't some gift. It's a curse. Zira reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, surprising him with her touch. I know, she said quietly. But you don't have to go through this alone. I can help you understand it, Kale. You don't have to be afraid of it. Kale stared at her, his breath heavy. He could feel the power inside him, the potential, the force that seemed to pulse with every beat of his heart. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt wild, untamed, but also familiar, like it was a part of him that had been hidden, waiting for the right moment to surface. "I don't even know what I'm becoming," Kale muttered, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I feel different. I don't feel like myself anymore." Zira gave him a small, reassuring smile. "That's because you're not the same person you were before. But that doesn't mean you've lost who you are. You're still Kale. This power doesn't change who you are at your core. It just gives you new possibilities. What you choose to do with those possibilities is up to you." Kale let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure if he could trust her words, but somehow, the calmness in her voice made him want to believe it. He wanted to understand this power, but more than that, he wanted to control it before it controlled him. He looked into her eyes, trying to find some sense of clarity. "And what happens if I can't control it?" he asked quietly. Zira's gaze softened. "Then we face the consequences together. But I believe you can control it, Kale. You've already made it this far. You're stronger than you think." Kale nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew he couldn't do this alone. If he was going to survive this transformation, he needed to trust Zira. He needed to learn how to use this power for something more than just survival. He had to figure out what it meant to be human, while becoming something else entirely, Azau. The days passed. Kyle continued to feel the power growing inside him. His strength increased with every passing moment, his senses more attuned to the world around him. But with that strength came a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't afford to lose control, not when there were so many people depending on him, not when the fate of his people, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was on the line. Kale didn't know what was coming next, but he was ready. With Zira by his side, he would face whatever challenge lay ahead. Together they would figure out what this power meant and how to stop it from consuming him. Kale's transformation wasn't just physical. With each passing day he could feel the power growing stronger, surging through his veins, pushing him to the edge. At first it was just a strange sense of heightened awareness, his senses sharper, his body lighter. But soon he realized it was more than that. The power inside him was becoming harder to control, and with it came a growing sense of fear. He had tried to ignore it, tried to push it down, but it was like trying to hold back an ocean with his hands. No matter how hard he tried, the waves kept crashing against him. And with each wave, Kale could feel something inside him shifting. It was as if he was no longer entirely human, and the more he embraced the power, the further he drifted from who he used to be. Zira had been his constant companion, the one person who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. She was the one who had warned him about the dangers of the power inside him, but even she seemed unsure of how to stop it. The Julara species had ancient records, stories of humans with powers that could change the course of history, but those stories were so old they were barely more than legends. No one had seen anything like this for centuries. One evening, as Kale sat alone in his quarters, trying to sort through his thoughts, Zira found him again. She didn't speak at first, simply stood at the door, watching him with a concerned look on her face. "You're getting worse," she said softly, her voice carrying a tone of worry that Kale hadn't heard from her before. Kale didn't look up. He didn't want her to see the struggle in his eyes. "I know," he muttered, his voice heavy. "It's getting harder to control. The power inside me. I can't stop it, Zira. It's like a beast inside me, clawing to break free." Zira stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind her. "Kale, we have to find a way to understand it. We can't just let it consume you." "I don't know how," Kale whispered. "It feels like it's too late. What if I can't control it? What if it takes over?" Zira moved closer to him, kneeling down beside the chair where he sat. "Listen to me," she said gently. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together, I promise. Kale looked at her, his eyes dark with doubt. You don't know what this is like. You don't know what it feels like to have something like this growing inside you. Zira placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and steady. I know more than you think, she said quietly. I've seen what power can do to people, but you're not like the others, Kale. You're not a weapon. You're a man, a soldier. This power may be inside you, but it doesn't define you. Kale took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. He couldn't let it consume him. Not when there was still so much to protect, but the more he tried to push the power away, the stronger it seemed to get. I need to understand it, Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to know what I've become. Zira nodded, standing up. We'll find the answers. We'll go to the archives, dig through the old records. We'll find out what this power means and how to control it. For the first time in days, Kyle felt a glimmer of hope. Zira's words were a lifeline, and he clung to them, unwilling to let go. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to face this alone. The next day, they traveled to the Julara archives, a vast, ancient library hidden deep within the station's lower levels. The air was thick with the scent of old scrolls and the hum of ancient machinery. As they walked through the corridors, Kyle couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The records in this place were older than anything he had ever encountered, filled with knowledge and history that could hold the key to understanding his transformation. Zira led the way, her fingers brushing over the spines of ancient tomes, as she searched for something that might help. The Julara keep records of every human who has ever awakened this power, she said, her voice thoughtful. But these records are incomplete. There's so much we don't know. Kale's mind raced as he sat in the conference room, his thoughts a whirl of fear, confusion, and a desperate hope that he could still find control over the power within him. The room was silent except for the occasional hum of the station's technology. Across from him sat the alien council, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Zira stood beside him, her presence steady and calming, but Kale could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. He had already learned that the Julara species, while advanced in knowledge, had little tolerance for unpredictability. And Kyle, with the growing power inside him, had become an unpredictable force. We've been observing you, Kyle, said one of the council members, an older, stern-looking alien with deep violet skin. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Your transformation cannot go unnoticed. This power you've unlocked is not just human in nature. It's something far older, far more dangerous. Kale clenched his fists, trying to keep his temper in check. The council's words echoed in his mind, but he had heard them all before. Dangerous. Uncontrollable. Unpredictable. He was tired of hearing it. Tired of being told what he might become instead of being given a chance to choose his own path. I'm not a weapon, Kyle finally said, his voice steady but firm. I don't need to be controlled. I'm doing my best to understand this power, but I need time. Zira stepped forward, her eyes meeting the council's, her tone calm but insistent. Kyle is right. He doesn't want to be a threat to anyone. He's just trying to learn how to control what's inside him. The council remained silent for a long moment. The air between them was thick with tension, and Kale could feel the eyes of every council member boring into him, weighing him as though he were some kind of experiment. Finally, the elder with violet skin spoke again, his voice colder this time. Time is a luxury we don't have. You must understand, Kale, that your power threatens the balance of the galaxy. It cannot be allowed to spiral out of control. If you cannot prove that you are capable of controlling it, we will have no choice but to neutralize the threat. Kale felt the words hit him like a slap. Neutralize. They were talking about him as if he were a problem to be solved, a danger to be erased. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to remain calm. You're saying that if I can't control it, you'll just destroy me? His voice was low, full of frustration, but there was no denying the sting of those words. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't asked for any of it. And now the very people he had come to trust, the ones he had hoped might help him, were threatening him. "You are not the only one to have faced such power," another council member, a much younger alien with bright green skin, spoke up. "But the others who've had it were either destroyed or controlled by their own fear. They became what they were most afraid of, what they couldn't control. That's what we're trying to prevent." Kyle turned to Zira, his eyes searching hers. She had been his support throughout this whole ordeal, the one person who had believed in him. But now, even she looked uncertain. It was clear that the council wasn't going to give them any more time. If Kale couldn't prove he could control this power, the council would step in, and that would be the end of it. "I won't let that happen," Kale said firmly, turning back to the council. His voice was stronger now, more certain. "I'll prove to you that I can control it, but I need your help, not your threats." The elder alien shook his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "We cannot afford to let your power grow unchecked. If you refuse our help, we will have no choice but to act." Zira's hand rested on Kale's shoulder, her touch gentle but steady. She wasn't backing down either. "We're asking for time to understand it," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "If you help him, we can find a way to control this power. But if you neutralize him, you will never know what he's truly capable of." The council's silence was deafening. Kale could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air, a burden neither of them could escape. He was at a crossroads, with the fate of his life and the lives of countless others on the line. The elder council member stared at Kale for what felt like an eternity, his eyes piercing. "You have 3 days," he said finally. 3 days to prove that you can control this power. If you fail, we will neutralize the threat." The words sent a chill down Kale's spine, but he nodded, determination replacing the fear that had threatened to overtake him. He didn't have much time, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now, not after everything he had been through. 3 days, Kale repeated, his voice steady. "I'll show you I can control it." As the council members left the room, Zira stayed behind, her hand still resting on Kale's shoulder. "Kale, are you sure you can do this?" Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't have a choice." Zira nodded, her expression serious but resolute. "We'll figure it out. You're not alone in this." Kyle looked at her, feeling a small measure of hope return. He wasn't sure how this was going to end, but with Zira by his side, he felt a little less afraid. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for a chance to prove that he could control this power, for a chance to prove that he was still in control of his own fate. Kale stood in the center of the training room, his muscles tense, his mind racing. He had 3 days. 3 days to prove to the alien council that he could control the power inside him. The thought of it weighed heavily on his chest. 3 days felt like an eternity, and yet it was nothing more than a ticking clock, counting down the time until the council's final decision. Zira stood beside him, watching with a mix of concern and hope. She had been his anchor throughout this entire ordeal, and now more than ever, Kale needed her strength. He could feel the power inside him growing, pulsing beneath his skin, ready to break free. But he didn't want to lose control. He couldn't afford to. "Kyle," Zira said softly, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone. I'm here." He turned to her, his eyes filled with both fear and determination. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. "But this is something I have to do. For myself. I need to prove to them that I can handle this power, that I'm not a threat." Zira nodded, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You've already proven that. But now you need to prove it to yourself." Kyle took a deep breath, feeling the energy inside him simmering beneath the surface. It was strange, this power. It wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, everything at once. Every feeling, every thought seemed to sharpen, become more intense. He had never experienced anything like it before, and part of him feared, what would happen if he lost control? What if he became the very thing the council feared? Zira gave him a reassuring smile. You've come this far, Kale. Trust yourself. With her words in his mind, Kale took another step forward. The training room was large and empty, but the silence in the air felt suffocating. The holographic training targets flickered to life. In front of him, a series of moving figures meant to challenge his reflexes, his strength. But this time Kale wasn't just focused on the targets. He was focused on the power inside him, the power that he had barely begun to understand. The first target shot toward him, moving fast, but Kale's reflexes were faster. His hand shot out, and with a single movement, the target exploded into pixels. He felt a surge of energy, but he kept his breathing steady, focused. The next target came even faster, but Kyle was ready. His body moved without thinking, and with one swift motion, he disabled it as well. His confidence grew, and with each target he destroyed, he could feel his control over the power tightening, like a rope being pulled taut. But then the final target appeared, a larger, faster moving hologram. It was more than just a target. It was a challenge, one that Kale knew would test him like nothing else had before. This was it. This was the moment that would decide his fate. Kale closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath. He could feel the power inside him coursing through his veins, thrumming with energy. He reached deep inside himself, searching for the calm that would help him focus. He could feel the weight of the council's warning hanging over him, the threat of being neutralized if he couldn't control it. But this time Kale didn't focus on the fear. This time he focused on the control. He was not a weapon. He was not a threat. He was in control of his own destiny. With a single fluid motion, Kyle reached out and struck the final target. The room shook with the force of the impact, the hologram disintegrating into nothing. But it wasn't the force of the strike that made Kale pause. It was the feeling inside him. The power was there, but it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't consuming him. Kyle stood still for a moment, his heart pounding as he felt the power settle inside him. He had done it. For the first time since this all started, Kyle felt in control. He had faced the power, and he hadn't let it control him. He had chosen to control it. Zira stepped forward, her face bright with pride. You did it, Kale. You controlled it. Kale turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I guess I did. The door to the training room slid open and 2 council members stepped inside. The elder with violet skin was there, his expression unreadable,